Great, so it is 4:35 and we're gonna go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Amaris Gonzalez. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve as the Student Life Advisor for student organizations and activities at the Office of the Dean of Students, that is formerly known as SLL or Student Life and Leadership. We wanna thank you all for coming to Miku and the Gods panel discussion as part of one SDSU community programming. And just to preface, we will be recording this event. Before we get started, I do want to start today's event with the land acknowledgement. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been part of this land. This land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations in a relationship of balance and harmony. As members of the San Diego State community, we acknowledge this legacy. We promote this balance and harmony. We find inspiration from this land, the land of Kumeyaay. The goal of One SDSU community is to provide opportunities for you to learn about yourselves and the perspectives, experiences, and identities that make you unique, allowing you to connect with other students to learn about their journeys. By having these opportunities, the hope is that ultimately every member of the SDSU community comes to embrace diversity in all its forms, bringing our community together as one diverse group. One SDSU's programming framework has 3 themes, and this afternoon's program theme is activating community dialogue. Together, we will be engaging in activities that provide learning about identities through both self-exploration and exploring others' perspectives. Over the course of today's panel discussion, feel free to make comments in the chat box, and if you'd like to pose a question to one of our speakers, please post it in the Q&A section. At the end of this program, we invite you to share about your experience with a brief survey. We hope you will take a few minutes to share your thoughts. Now I'd like to turn it over to Eric Smigel, Chair of the Arts Alive at SDSU.
Thank you, Amaris. Hello, everyone, and happy Filipinx American History Month. I'm pleased to welcome you to the second production in this year's Arts Alive SDSU Discovery Series, which is an annual selection of events that address socio-political and cultural issues through the visual and performing arts. We're delighted to continue our partnership this semester with One SDSU, who is sponsoring these interdisciplinary panel discussions. And I'd like to thank Amaris and the team at the Center for Student Organizations and Activities for their ongoing support of arts programming across campus. Today's discussion focuses on Miku and the Gods, an SDSU production of an original play by Julia Izumi. A tender comedy and an epic adventure, the play explores timeless themes of death, friendship, and power through the imaginative lens of Miku, a 12-year-old Japanese-American girl who wants to be a god. In this playful rendering of a contemporary mythology, Izumi weaves a living tapestry of cultural heritage, intergenerational memory, and the challenges of finding one's place in a complex world. As our SDSU community comes back together to find our own collective place, the art of theater gives us an opportunity to rediscover ourselves and each other, encouraging us to practice empathy and compassion, and reminding us of the profound beauty and fragility of the human condition. We're therefore deeply grateful for our faculty and student artists whose creativity, industriousness, and dedication continue to enrich our community far beyond the stage. It's now my pleasure to introduce our featured panelists. Dr. Virginia Loh-Hagan, Director of the APIDA Center, Professor Peter Cirino from the School of Theater, Television, and Film, and Director of the SDSU production of Miku and the Gods, Professor Anne Hua from the Department of Women's Studies and Associated Faculty in the Center for Asian and Pacific Studies, and our special guest artist, the creator of Miku and the Gods, playwright Julia Izumi.
Super. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And for all of y'all in the crowd, I hope you know what a treat this is to be able to be in community and space with the playwright and also the director, and of course, 2 fun, awesome professors like me and Dr. Hua. So this is a great way to spend your Tuesday evening. So first, we want to get right into it. This play is about a family of Japanese heritage, and the Japanese culture shows up in Miku, the main character, Miku's grandma, rice making, Japanese words, and of course, the use of Japanese mythology. And the American culture also shows up in Miku's way of talking and, allusions to pop culture. For example, there is an early allusion to Partridge Family, which some of you kiddos out there might not know, but we know what Partridge Family means. But so you have this mixture of, of Japanese and American elements throughout. So the first question I have is to our playwright, Julia. Why is it important for the play to be Japanese American? Could you have chosen a different culture? Why or why not?
Hey, yeah, thank you. Just wanted to say what an an honor it is to be in this space with you all. Yeah, I guess I think Miku is Japanese American kind of just because I am Japanese American, and a lot of her something that happened, her story is not my story specifically, but a lot of me is in her. And so she just kind of in writing from what writing from your own experience, she just sort of became that. And in the end, it also was kind of important to me that a lot of the characters in the play come from sort of polytheistic religions or mythology, and my grandma is Shinto Buddhist, and so the grandma in the piece, the grandma character in this piece is also Shinto Buddhist, and so that piece of it was important as well. So I feel like in that way, the Japanese-ness about it definitely ties into a lot of the play itself, and also sort of the way that the family handles grief, or sort of doesn't handle grief in general, is also definitely a way in which I feel like is something that I have sort of noted in my own family. And so the play is a lot of a reflection of my own experiences in my own family. And so that's sort of how they sort of became Japanese American. I'm sure there could have been a world in which she wasn't, and had maybe a similar story, but it seems very solid in her that's her heritage and her culture.
Sure. So it's almost like you hear a lot with creatives too, this notion of like, write what you know, right? And then learn the rest.
Yeah.
So, it is, writing what you're writing about your background. So Professor Cirino and Professor Hua, what do you think? Like, what does it mean that this play represents, Japanese American and larger, the APIDA culture? What does this mean to you? So we'll start with you, Professor Hua, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think that's important because growing up, I love the arts and theater, and every time I go to theater, it's always stories about white people in North America, Euro-America, and so it's refreshing, I think. And it's and if there's like other forms of theater, often it's about Black communities. So there are so few about Asian community, and particularly Japanese and Japanese American. So yeah, to me, I want to thank Julia for writing this and for Peter to direct this, and I think we need more of that representation.
So how do you identify, Professor Hua?
I'm actually Chinese diasporic. I was born in Vietnam, lived in Vietnam, Indonesia, Canada, US. So I'm kind of more multinational. And so I think of myself as Chinese Canadian living in the US and teaching US.
Oh, wow. All right. What about you, Professor Cirino? So how do you identify, and what does this mean to have, this play that is Asian American, and for you to direct it?
So my grandmother was a Filipino, and so I felt like I needed that connection in a way that refreshed my artistry, and I kind of kept finding it within the structure of stories about women, and being brought up by my mom, who was a single mom. I really felt every time I've come across these stories that have these amazingly powerful women, I connect with them a lot, probably because of my mom, because of this kind of very strong matriarchal kind of world that I was brought up in, and I feel like that needs to be represented more, because I think that the moment that we begin to forget that, and that's the beauty that lies within this piece to me, is that there's this constant kind of thirst for remembering, but then also this constant search from us that like it reminded me so much of myself. I was constantly trying to swallow up as much of the culture as I could as I went down, because you get at first, that first swatch of being within any of the cultures, you get the food, you get the music, you get that ambiance, right? But then if you go a little bit further, that's where it begins to tug at your heartstrings, that you would start understanding and having a connection to not only that cultural connection currently, but that connects to your past, that brings you a whole essence of kind of people that you really need to explore and need to be connected to, because it's part of who you are. And that's what this show does for me. Every time I look at it and we run it, because now we're in big runs before the opening, and I just get taken away by the story and by the fierceness and the dynamism that this young character that Julia wrote so well, Miku. And it makes me long for those times when I was little, to have that much thirst, to be that sponge and to want to take on the world.
I love your reference to being thirsty and to, swallowing up the culture. And I know how, you young folk use the term thirsty, and that's not how we're using it here. I think, it's this notion of, as a creative myself, and, I've written several children's books, and they mainly are about Asian American culture. And, in that process, it's like, I also feel like that process of making art about Asian American culture is also helping me to dig into my roots and my heritage as well. And I identify as Chinese, but my parents had asylum in Cambodia during the Khmer Rouge. So I also have Cambodian roots. And of course, I was born in the United States. So we've got these different intersectionalities and these different identities. But I can tell you how excited I get when I see an Asian American on stage. And when I see an Asian American playwright, when I see, the fact that on campus we have flyers that say Miku and the gods, and, that it's this notion of being seen and heard. And I know what that does for me. So representation matters, right? So thank you for, putting this on. Immediately in the play, we are immersed into a conversation about gods. And so I just kind of want to talk about the mythology, because we're so tied to mythology. And why is mythology important to culture? And what do we think about mythology and culture? So maybe, again, I'm going to go ahead and start with the playwright, with Julia. If you could tell us, why was mythology so important in this play? I mean, the whole play is about little Miku who wants to be a god, right? So, and you focus on the mythology of the Asian American culture. Tell us more.
Yeah, I think mythology is really important to maintain culture. And also for me, it was really important because that's sort of how a lot of how I received my Japanese culture from my from my grandma in particular. She would tell me stories, and also I grew up, there was this like whenever I would visit her in Japan, there was this like series of like short, like little tiny picture books of like different fables and fairy tales from around the world. And every time I would visit her, and every time we would go into town, we would like buy one of those books, and it was like my favorite thing to do, to like read those books. So that not only sort of connected me to her and to my family and to my culture, but it also really connected me to her, like to my family. That was just sort of the way that we got to spend our time together. And so I wanted to make sure to show that in this play. This is how Miku and her grandma spend time together, is that grandma tells Miku stories. So that was really kind of important for me to show. And I think, for this, because the play is a lot about loss and sort of feeling lost, and all of those things, it was also kind of important for me as for the play to sort of also be creating a new kind of mythology for her. Like, maybe she's creating it herself, maybe the gods are creating it for her. I just thought it was important also to sort of see what would happen if we could create, it's great that we have, old mythologies and we have all of those old things, but also connecting it to the future and creating something new.
Excellent. So Professor Cirino or Professor Hua, do you have comments about this idea of mythology and culture?
Should I go first?
Sure.
Yeah, I think cultural myth is really important, particularly it ties to one's roots and history, group pride. And so, yeah, and whenever any cultural text that refers to cultural text, cultural myth, it's tapping into returning, reclaiming one's heritage, one's history. In a world, the mainstream world always wants to elide that or marginalize a group by denying their history making or her story making. And in terms of gods, I really like that the play, it moves away from monotheism, that often any references to spirituality or God is about, Jesus Christ or Christ in North America. And I grew up in a family that's Chinese and we're more Buddhist. But as I got older, I didn't want to also believe in one religion. I believe in we should have interfaith as a society so that it's more open. And Chinese culture, there's many, many gods. We have the kitchen god, the business god, the prosperity god, all kinds of gods, every possible gods out there to take care of you and your well-being. So I really like that in this play, Miku and God, there's these multiple gods, including Sarah, the minor god of war and beautification. So there's different level and tiers of gods and multiple gods, and gods challenge you, and gods who lose their power if they don't have worshippers. So the gods seem more human than the kind of monotheism where God is all over powering and they have control of everyone. Here, God and human coexist in the same world, even though there's different parallels of reality. So I really like that aspect.
Wow. Professor Cirino?
I think that the thing that is so beautiful about it is the world creating. Anytime you can get to a place and something can be created in front of you in a very short span of time, because in less than 2 hours you have to have an intermission, you have to have all the setup, you have to have everything, and the show really gives you that. It creates a whole nother universe of deities that and the freedom that Julia gives the directors and the actors to create those gods, because it's not specific about what kind of gods. And so we went much further than picking a culture, picking this. We picked the raw essence of what we thought kind of gods came from, the sun, the kind of hunting, the lava, things that were of this place, and then those became the elements that created the world. And so that to me is amazing when you can add that mythology. And that's what we all do, right? When we create a group of friends, whether some of us are Asian, some of us are Latinx or Black, and we all create kind of a world around us. Because of those mixtures together, we become something brand new. And in that creation, to me, is the genius of where the good parts of this country are. Those mixtures, those beautiful kind of connections that we make, those synapses mixing with each other. So
yeah, I love mythology. I've always been fascinated by mythology, and I have just written books about the Norse mythology, and it's this notion of that myths provide answers. Right? They explain things that once upon a time folks didn't, why do we have thunder? These things that now we have science to explain. But once upon a time, it was these myths that explained why these things, these magical, unexplainable things. But I still think that even though we have science and we have science explain why we have thunder, I feel like we are still tied to myth because they explain things like universal truths, why do we have love? Why do we have honor? Why do we have all the I feel like myths are still necessary in our time. But it is interesting, and you've all touched upon this notion of myths as part of our culture and our heritage. And, it helps to tell us who we are and where we came from. So Miku wants to be a god. That's the essence of the play. And this makes me think about Marvel and Shang-Chi specifically. And, I am pretty sure that almost everyone here has seen Shang-Chi. If you haven't, you need to go and watch it. It's amazing. But we finally have an Asian American Marvel hero. And again, that does a lot for our representation. And Julia, I'm going to kick this question to you. What would Miku think about this? What would Miku think about Shang-Chi?
Yeah, what would Miku think about Shang-Chi? Miku is she's a very precocious child, and she's also like, very, very social justice activated. And so I think she would be excited about Shang-Chi, but also at the same time, I think she would, she's always talking about how the patriarchy is ruining her life. And so I think she'd have a lot of opinions about like, why wasn't it a woman? Like, why, like, why? Like, I want to see women taking up the space and being heroes, that kind of thing, and that's sort of what she ends up doing too, is she kind of wants to be a heroine in her own story. So I feel like that's I think she would be excited, but she would still have a lot of criticism, which is also probably because she's Asian too.
Sure. So Miku also references the model minority theory, and this happens in the early scenes. She says, quote, some of them even had the audacity to, this is when I just want to set up the scene, and Miku's going around asking for advice on how to be a god. And she's talking to her grandmother about it. And she says, some of them even had the audacity to say a smart young woman like me is better off becoming a doctor or a politician. So what does this mean, that when Miku is discouraged from becoming a god to be the preferable doctor or politician instead? I'm going to ask Professor Hall, I'm going to have you start with that. What do you think? We see this element of the model minority there.
Yeah, I really like that scene. Well, throughout, Miku is really rebellious as a character, and as Asian female, particularly Japanese American, and a 12-year-old, just this little kid, and already like she has to face with these model minority stereotypes that Asians are always stereotyped as we're really smart, we're really good at school, we get good grades, and we should one day become doctors and other professions and so on. And she refuses that because that is the stereotype of Asian American are placed into. And she wants more power than that, the power of being a doctor or a professor or a lawyer or these really prestigious, professions. She wants to be God, to have the ultimate power, the power, to be God, you have the most power over all humans. And so she wants to have not accept less than that. And I think it's really, it speaks to the kind of barrier women face, younger face, and particularly Asian American youngers, and in this case, Japanese American younger, is that she wants to become God every time she knocks on the door to the house of God and asks them to let her in. No one answers her, no one opens her at the very beginning. And she needs to get Ephraim to help her get into this house of God. And even then, when she meets the one who is wise, in hopes that she can get the skills and learn the skills to become God, he keeps telling her you should learn to bake. And so it reduces women and young girls, and in this case, Asian women, young girls, and Japanese American girls, to say, go back to your domesticity and your reproductive role as a young woman. You shouldn't aspire to have godly power. And she wants to use godly power not to do damage or harm, but want to change the world. So she's an activist. Like here, this is a character who's a feminist and activist and a humanitarian, but she wants more empowerment that's given to her because she's so young, because of her gender and her race and ethnicity. So yeah, so I say, you go, girl.
So Julia, as the playwright, were you thinking about the model minority theory in that scene?
I wasn't actually specifically thinking about it in that scene, but I do think that a lot of this, like, the ambition that really fuels Miku is sort of influenced by this kind of pressure, I think, for young Asian folks to be you have to be excellent, you have to be the best, you have to get the best grades, you have to be the best version of everything. And I think that is I do think that that is part of what really fuels her to be like, well, I'm going to be the best, the best, most powerful thing ever invented, which is a god. So yeah, I think that's, and that's also is part of what causes her downfall too. So I think that is, I think that, yeah, that's definitely, I was definitely sort of conscious of that when sort of creating her character.
Thank you. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit and also talk about, there's in the opening scene, there's a conversation about forks being an example of appropriation and proof of colonization. And this was a really fascinating topic. And so Professor Cirino, I'm gonna ask you, what is cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation?
Yeah, that's one of those fine lines to me, because we have to trust with it that within the culture we can determine that for ourselves, and not let somebody else write a book on it or tell us what to do about it. Because I think that the moment that we step outside of our culture, we have to acknowledge that other people's understanding of it aren't the same as the ones that we're living with it. So if even when you were saying about trying to fit into a model of an image that people have for us, that begins to crumble, because we have forced ourselves to be other things. We have forced ourselves to be artists. We have forced ourselves to reach to a higher level. Yeah. And so I think that the moment that we can sit there and say, this is our culture, then people should respect that and not transcend into it. That if you are doing a show that involves an Asian community, you should, like in this show, I think over half of the kids have partial or a mixed and of Asian and other. We have the cat. I always make sure that my casts are fully integrated in the way that we cast male for female, female for male, by non-binary. We don't look at that gap, and we also don't accept that if certain things are within our culture, that we can go outside that culture. So I always want to look at what the definitions are within our cultures, and I think we need to make those definitions, not other people.
Thank you. Professor Hua, what do you think? When or why is appropriation inappropriate?
Yeah, with appropriation or cultural appropriation, it takes the power away from the community. And I think we should represent it. When we tell a story about a community, whether it's like our community or others, we should be sensitive, have cultural sensitivity about how we represent the other. And so like there's long history of like blackface, yellowface and stuff like that. It was really disturbing. And even to this day, like that's still, still happening. Or when the stories about people of color, and then you have like white actor and actresses play the character, and it happens a lot in film and in the past in theater. So I think we have to be conscious of it and be like more extra careful around issues of appropriating others and others' culture. But it's a blurring line too. Like you want to be authentic without like, always claiming authenticity. That there should be room for creativity, and so I like that Peter said that he casts like female character with male actor and actress, and an opposite, including non-binary, so that it opens like space for creativity a bit more. So
I think it's important to live in that gray space, right? It's almost like when we know We know when it's bad. We all know it's like cringy, right? So we all feel that. But it is, you know, we also have to have room for creativity and, you know, individual truths, etc. So this kind of moves into my next question, and Julia, I'm going to have you start it. But, you know, when making art, especially art about culture, there is this fear of the culture of cancel culture, right? So what are your thoughts about this? I'd like to, you know, as an artist, you know, does that, especially when you're wanting to write about culture and maybe about a culture that you might not be yours, but that you know a lot about, etc. Like, where are the, you know, what do you think about when you're thinking about this notion of cancel culture and cultural appropriation in terms of your art?
Oof, yeah, that is
Yeah.
such a that
Big.
should get a panel on its own, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, I'm definitely like, you know, cancel culture is so toxic that I'm more afraid of cancel culture than I am of like, I'm afraid of it more for like the social media, like you know, fluttering and backlash that, and not for the actual, you know, like one should always be, when making art, wary of not causing harm with their art, right? That's the thing I least want to do, is to cause harm with my art. But with this sort of, you know, strength and power of sort of this like mob mentality on social media, I'm like, I get more afraid of making art because of that, and not actually like thinking about like, yeah, just, you know, harming people. Like what is going to harm people? Like, is it going to be like, you know, representing someone in a way that is going to, you know, give off impressions that they're kind of way and endanger their lives further by making them feel smaller? You know, like those are really the kinds of questions that I wish we would spend more time thinking about. Lately I'm like, but you know, also at the same time, like there's just, you know, there's no way that everybody's going to be happy with what I do. You know, there's going to be someone out there who probably sees my work and is like, oh my god, like I hate, like that is the worst thing, like they got it all wrong, like you know, that, you know, that kind of, I mean, it even happens with other like fellow Japanese American artists. For me too, I like see their work and I'm like, wow, like that, they got it totally right, you know, like that kind of thing. And so yeah, I think it's about, I really think it is a balance of just like doing as little harm as possible, and thereby like approaching art with more care in mind, and like what can you do to are you telling the story to take care of somebody, and who are you taking care of? And like, I think that's sort of the more important focus, I feel like, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that, you know, like do no harm, right? I mean, that's like, we could set out in all of our whatever various disciplines, it's to do no harm. So Professor Cirino, what about you as a director? How are you affected by cancel culture? What do you think about?
You know, I think it's one of those added new fears. You know, you have the fears being a professor, and because all these people forget that all these productions are classes for us, and so you know you're in a class, and so we have luckily within our midst one of our other professors, Jessica Prudencio. Has been studying a kind of new area for us. It's called an intimacy director, and they handle not only places where the subject matter is dealing with physical encounters, but also with psychological kind of issues, cultural connections, and how physically those kind of interact with each other in the play. So that oftentimes is really critical, because you do have that looming fear, and it just added another big old thing you have to carry with you. You know, like when you walk into class now, it's like, what if I say you know, something where I'm trying to provide a lesson through experience that I've gone through, and then all of a sudden somebody hears that and go, oh my goodness, that's what you know, and they're thinking, oh no, you did that, and I go, no, I'm telling you what happened to me. But if they experience it wrong, or they hear it in their own mind wrong, you could be canceled. And I think that's I'm not sure if it's wrong, because it came from something Does that make sense? It's not one of those places where we can say, all wrong, cancel culture is horrible, but it stemmed from kind of an inequality for years, and that bubbled up and exploded. And I think in that explosion, sometimes things get thrown in that weren't supposed to be thrown in. But
Yeah.
but it didn't come from emptiness. It didn't come
No.
out of
Yes.
it came because there was this pressure on the community, on a lot of communities, on women, on black, on Latinx, Asian. I mean, all of them, that pressure, and then it just exploded. And that's what I think cancel culture is from. So we have to understand it in the classroom.
Yeah.
And try to work our way around it and teach better so that so people understand where it's coming from.
Well, and I think it's like, we want to be critical, right? That's part of the discipline. And I think we want to also be, we want to have these art be a springboard for learning. And, I feel like it's also a journey, a journey for the artists and a journey for the folks in the audience. So, we need to take these experiences as a learning journey. And yeah, I mean, it gets like, I connect with what you're saying about how it started from a place of care. And but we need to continue to have that care. And then Professor Hall, is there something that you'd like to say about the culture of cancel culture before we move on to the second part of our panel?
I think I'm good, but I just learned that term today. I didn't hear about the idea of cancel culture, so you mentioned it, and so it's interesting. Yeah. But I think I would like to research more about what that does.
I think that's interesting in itself that you just learned. It's something, as I would say, as a creative person myself, it is something I think about. Because we have to think about we have to think about the reviews and the critics and how it's going to be perceived, so I think that's something that I think about all the time, actually.
Yeah.
And not so much cancel culture, but like the perception, like you do think about how it's going to be received. And you think about like, am I going to be on the front page of the news in a bad way? So these are things as creatives I think we think about. So I think that's interesting to me that wasn't something that was in your wheelhouse, but it's something that we think about. But okay, so we're going to move into the second part of our panel. Don't go away, everyone's still here, but what we're going to do is we're going to show you a clip. So you're going to get a sneak preview, y'all. Like this is very special. You're going to get a sneak preview, and Julia is going to kindly set it up and recap it for us. And then we're going to go into the second half of our conversation based on the clip. And then also we're going to allow some space for Q&A at the end as well. So hang on to your seat. So we are going to, I believe, Professor Cirino, you were going to share your screen and show the clip. And then Julia, do you want to go ahead and set it up?
Yeah, so the story mainly does focus on Miku, who wants to become a god, and sort of her journey. But at the same time, it's also about her grandma, who has made a friend with Shara, who is the Sumerian, who's a Sumerian god. He's the minor god of war, and he's also a beautician. And so they sort of become friends over, while Miku is off on her journey. And I think right before this, we kind of Shara sort of realizes that he has to leave because there's some trouble happening with his worshipers, because he is a god after all. And so he has to leave her, and so he's come to tell her that he has to go. And I think that's where we're starting. Yeah. Oh, I don't think we can hear.
So we're not getting volume. Here we go. We're in.
We got it.
I used my willpower to look in your hospital file, and I found out that you are not dying fast as the first. You're actually very healthy. You don't you have diabetes. Your memories are dying a little bit. Well, maybe much faster than most, but you'll be okay.
No, my memories are me. When they go, I go with them.
But you still have a heart. That's living.
Living is more than a part. It's about remembering and being remembered, which is why forgetting and being forgotten are both so painful. In either case, you're losing part of yourself. That's what makes it so frightening. I'm not in control over what I remember or what I forget. You're a god. You don't know what it's like to not be in control. There's something very, very tragic that happened that I can't remember. But and every time I remember it anew, it just gets blurrier and smaller. I need to keep that memory alive. I need to keep it as crystal clear and shiny as the sea he's named after. I think Miku running away from me. We're supposed to do this together. I need to teach her how to. I need to help her hold him and how to let him. We're supposed to do this together. That's why I need your help, Shasta. I need you to take me to my underworld and help me get my memory of that tragic night back. I need to keep his memory alive. I'm willing to trade all my memories for that one. For her. For both of them.
Okay. But maybe after I deal with this war business, though, I mean, my worshippers, they really are in trouble.
It'll be too late by then. By that time, I might have forgotten Miku completely. I might even forget you.
Me?
You take me to the underworld, I worship you, and I can help spread your cult and
No!
please, Shada-san, Miku. Miku is so smart that her parents forget how little she is. She can't do this without me.
Mistake. I said no as a. I don't want you to be my worshiper. Worshippers, they say they love me and they do all this stuff in my name. Cause so many wars against all their worshippers. They don't really see me. Like the real me. Which makes me feel like
No one is really remembering me.
Maybe, yeah. But no one's remembering. That's why I like you so much, Miss Seiko. You really like me. Like the Shara me, not the God me. So I don't want you as my worshiper. I will take you to the underworld as your friend.
Shada-san, thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course. You're welcome, but we should leave soon though, because my worship it's just him. It's very far down the river. We might have to swim. Unless we take a friendship. How's that for a joke?
Not bad.
Yes! Yes!
Not good either.
Oh.
Motion 10. Miku and Afro.
Great, thank you. We're getting a lot of love for the set design. So why don't we talk about that for a second? So Professor Cirino, so tell us about the set design.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. In the years, I've been 18 years here at San Diego State, and this has to. And I'm not to disparage any other students, but this student that we have creating this set, she also did the projections. Her name is McKenna Perry. I've never met anybody as. I mean, our first meeting, she had pixelated things that were already drawn and crafted, and I was like, when did you do this? She goes, because she's she came from the professional world, so not, in drafting and doing other things, but it was just mind-boggling how prepared she was, how in-depth she understood the material, how she was trying to find a mathematical equation to Julia's numbering, and how she put the number, because if you look at the script, she's done some miraculous things with how the lines and the sizes, and so she was trying to find all these algorithms that were within it, and then along the way, I always give them an artist. When we start the show, I always give them an artist that has nothing to do with the show, and say, look for color, for texture, for thoughts from this artist. And I found a graphic novel that I had given her, and she kind of got caught with this idea of the water and everything being supported by water. And being on water is tenuous at times because you're not always 100% sure of your footing. So she did it all on her own, came up with this idea of a pier that kind of was the jumping point between where the gods exist and where the humans exist, and Shara is trapped in between. And then that just became a magical world, because then when they engulf us, they come into our little space, our little place where she's made home. And so yeah, that was just an amazing connection that I made with this designer. And then she also did the projections, which if you look, I don't know if you're able to notice, but she also made that look like water. So the projection screens go in one direction coming down, and then what we call the horizon bridge goes back this way, and then the pier comes back this way. So it's this constant flow of water. So she was brilliant in her kind of conceptual ideas, and the way she was able to represent that with this amazing set. And we didn't show it, but the kind of outline of doorways, those are actually library ladders. So they open, you can slide them down to different parts, and then when you stick your head through, the projection show a different world behind them, and then so slide it down to a different world and slide it down, it's a different world. So
super.
Yeah.
So Julia, do you want to say more about the scene that we just saw? Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I can just kind of summarize it because I know the sound was some people were saying it was a little hard to hear. But basically, so grandma is she's losing her memory. She is suffering from a little bit of dementia, and so there's this sort of very tragic thing that happened in her family, and she feels like she's forgetting that too, but she wants to. She really wants to hold on to that memory of that really tragic event, because even though it is very sad, it's really important. She knows it's really important to her family, and she also feels like she has to teach Miku how to get to cope with this sort of tragic thing that has happened in their family. And so she sort of is begging Shara to, instead of leaving, take her to her underworld to go and get that memory back so that she could keep it. She should keep it forever. Yeah, that's kind of the general gist of the scene. And I think she's saying, like, I will, and Shar is trying to leave because his worshipers seem to be dying and he needs to go take care of him. And grandma offers and says, I will become your worshiper if you can do this for me. And he actually says, no, I actually don't want you to do that, because then you wouldn't be my friend. And I really enjoy us being friends.
So I love the grandma's probably my favorite character. And I love a lot of her lines. They're just beautiful. But I do want to say a quote and then talk about it for a second. So the grandma says, "My memories are me. When they go, I go with them." So I'm going to say that again. My memories are me. When they go, I go with them. So I want us to talk about how our memories, culture, ancestral worship, filial piety, and mythology, how is it all connected? And I feel like you have, that quote, there's a lot to unpack there. So again, I'm gonna say it one more time. My memories are me. When they go, I go with them. So we'll start with Professor Hua. What did that make you think about?
Yeah, and I agree with you. My favorite character is the grandma too, because I think I'm always drawn to like elders. And when she says my memories of me, when they go, I go with them, it really taps into that. In every society, every culture, we pass on our storytelling within a family, in our community, and a society through generations, and the elders through storytelling to the younger ones. So the grandmother to the children, oh, sorry, I'm in a center like room, children and grandchildren and so on. And and if she ascends or passes away, it's the end of those memories unless she passes on through like storytelling to the children, grandchildren. And that's why she wants Miku to remember, including difficult, painful, or traumatic memory. And what Julia talked about, how there's some event that happened in the family that is painful, yet the grandmother, as she's losing her memory because she's reaching old age, she wants to retain that memory as opposed to like a happier memory. That memory is really important to her, and she wants to pass that to Miku and teach Miku how to remember. And memory is really important in every aspect, from individual historical memory, collective memory, group memory, because we live in a world, particularly in North America, where there is a prevalence of historical amnesia. We want to guys sweep things under the carpet, including thinking about the history of transatlantic slavery, the Holocaust, any kind of painful memory. And the most recent is the global pandemic, right? At some point, we pass it, and then we want to forget it because it was very painful as we're living it through. And that's, but for some people, it's really important to retain those painful, difficult history and memory so that history doesn't get repeated. Including the history of transatlantic slavery. And so I really like that scene when the grandmother's starting to lose memory. It's also Miku's trying to find her power and trying to become God. I don't know if I'm giving too much away by telling the story, but that she puts her grandma in old people's home, and that happened so quickly. There was no lead up to it. It was all of a sudden there was one scene the grandma lost her memory, and next thing she is in old people's home. And it really helps us really think about when old people leave, elders leave, do we lose our history, our memories, our collective memory, historical memories, and how well do we treat our elders, because they are in the end they're the retainers of our identity, our history, and our memory. And so we need to pass those stories down, and through theater, this is one way, right, is to pass through stories down to the generation.
Yeah, art. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's a lot of snaps.
I'm sorry.
That's great. That's great. That's a great response. And I love your notion of this idea of historical amnesia, because I often think too, it's with memories, we also have this, a revision, right? People revising memories and erasing memories, and so selectively remembering certain parts over others. So yeah, what about you, Professor Cirino? What do you think about that quote? My memories are me. When they go, I go with them.
Yeah, memory is such a big issue. I've my work, the way I direct shows and the way I devise shows, that means creating them from scratch, and the way I've trained actors is with this process that I use called PMP, and it deals with three different areas, and the first one is passion. It's all about the physical body. The second one, that M, is a myth, a personal narrative. And what we do is we search back in our memory and find something that is true to ourselves that our families could recognize, almost like a shadow. Like if I mention these things, your family would go, well, that's obviously Anne. That's obviously Julia. It's, that's who they are, because they could hear the story even without knowing that it was about, that we're talking to you about you. And so I've always used that memory as something that we need to hold on to be able to pass on, because it was in oral histories years and years ago. But now we've kind of forgotten it. If it's not digital, if it's not a movie, if it's not, that it's kind of obliterated in our consciousness. But if we're able to retell those stories through our characters, through the books we write, through the kind of things we create, I think that's where we're able to retain those memories as a culture, and as parts of that culture ourselves, the individual memories that we bring to that culture.
So you had said in one of our meetings, while one is trying to reach for memories, the other is trying to create as many as they can. So this process of making, remembering and then making memories. Can you say more about that? You're muted.
Sorry, yes, I was hitting it and then I started talking.
We got you.
My mouth wasn't as fast as my finger. So I think that I look at Miku and she is the one that's just thirsty for everything. She's that sponge at the bottom that's just soaking up the world, and 100 miles an hour, and too much for her brain, and that's that search. That's what's going to keep our culture, I think, alive, is people like that and I really, and I know that, and not to, but this is how I see Julia. When the few conversations that we've had, and I see her as this beautifully hungry artist that has a vivid and alive mind, and that's Miku, and we're searching for the experiences that are going to make things deeper and richer, not only within our culture, but within us as human beings. And then I look at Grandma and I see, like all of you, there's such beautiful lines from her, I think that there's the person that's trying to remember back to those memories, because those memories are what makes things real. And people forget that. I think that if you don't start logging those in when you're younger, and when you get older, that's what you're thriving to get, because at that point, you're not experiencing as much stuff. But if you can relive those, they bring such life back to you and to the people that you share those with. So and I love to listen to people talk. I have this, my mom tells me stories of things that she's done, and I'm in awe of the things that she's gone through, and so I love that. And that's what I see is this kind of give and take in the show, this almost yin and yang, that one's giving, one's taking, but you're getting so much back from the other in reverse, so.
And it is kind of, especially with APIDA communities, a lot of the intergenerational, issues, this idea with elder, filial piety, ancestral worship, and the elders is like, we want to, the memories is important, that having that history, that collective community, individual history through our elders, but also at the same time, we have the future, the new generations making memories. So it is this push and pull between keeping, honoring, and then making and creating. So it's always there. We're always pushing and pulling between these. Another line that I loved, and again, it comes from Grandma, but another line that I love is that Grandma says, living is more than a heartbeat. It is remembering and being remembered. That's why forgetting and being forgotten are both so painful. So I'm going to read that again. Living is more than a heartbeat. It is remembering and being remembered. That's why forgetting and being forgotten are both so painful. Julia, can you tell us more? You wrote those words, but can you tell us more? What were you thinking?
Yeah, I think, this one, I think, came a little bit from, my grandma also went through dementia, and she was sort of, forgetting her, just kind of forgetting. And, I saw, it was so painful to watch her go through that. And especially, she just didn't seem like herself anymore. And, I think there was this, especially sort of at the end of her days, there was sort of like, do we, when, at a certain point when she was really at the end of her life in hospice, it was like, do we, like, what's the ethical thing to do here? Those sorts of questions came up. And so, yeah, I also saw her being really frustrated with forgetting too, like her sort of just noticing how painful it was like that she knew that she wasn't herself. And so I think there's just I was kind of trying to like articulate what her frustration was um, in that moment. And I think, you know, there's sort of this push in a lot of American medicine, Western medicine, to like just keep people alive, whatever form they're in. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough to just like have a living heartbeat, or if you don't have your faculties, if you don't have your memories, if you aren't lucid, like, is it worth it for that person to continue to have a heartbeat? Because then is it the same thing as almost kind of losing them to in a certain way?
So, Professor Hall, is there anything that you want to, what's your reaction to that quote? Living is more than a heartbeat. It is remembering and being remembered. That's why forgetting and being forgotten are both so painful.
Yeah, I really love that quote, and particularly that sentence, living is more than a heartbeat. It's so beautiful, it's so poetic. I think that line. And I agree when the grandmother says that, like, I always think it's important to remember, not just like individual collective cultural historical memory mentioned, but we ourselves have agency when we remember. In the moment you forget, or lose your memory, and what Julia said, losing faculty, if you're, say, in a coma, for example, are you existing? Are you living? And because every time we remember each event, each story, each experience, we change, right? We become another being, and we're always a new being with each day, each second, each minute, not just the years. And so for an elder to lose memory is really critical, because they lose a lifetime of experience, if they live till 80, 90, and so on. So 90 years of experiences. And then to be remembered too. And often in our society, we forget our elders. In Asian culture, it's so important to honor our elders. In fact, in Asian culture, they have the most power in the family. Like if you have an extended family, it's and particularly the matriarch, who's the older, it's like she can have more say. And young people are asked to kind of listen to and not to speak. And old people, we have to listen to them. And when we move to the West, that gets forgotten, that the elders actually have always been heard, they have always been remembered, they leave a legacy. And if we continue this tradition, and I think that's why the contrast of character, grandma is Japanese and Miku is Japanese American, there's a teaching in this theater, in this play, is that Miku has to realize, through the grandmother's lines, is that she's reminding us that people like Miku, the younger generation, need to remember her, because there's that fear of being forgotten, and she is the grandma, she's the matriarch. So I love things around memory and remembrance, because marginalized groups, and particularly people of color, and this is like a story about Japanese American family, is that the history with a capital H forget our stories. There's lots of micro stories, and all we hear is the larger narratives of history with a capital H, often about white people and dead men historically. And so it's nice to have this kind of representation to remind us that through memory we can rewrite history. And I always tell my students, if your family storytelling is not written in history, you have to make history and record it. And so this play is a kind of Julia's recording her family's history, right? So yeah, so I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah. Professor Cirino, what about you?
I think that the whole idea of connecting with memories is incredible. I still feel like at times when after listening to all of my mom's stories, I've put them in the work that I do in a constant, and I never forget them. And I think that's part of the honoring of the culture. When you're able to bring those stories to life within other stories and mix them, that's, to me, is beautiful. And I hope that for the rest, I hope that even in today's kind of massive emerging culture of forgetting the past, I think we should really help our students to turn back and look for just a second to enjoy that amazing the richness that our ancestors can bring us, and how we can bring them forth in the work we do, whether it's art or whether it's engineering or business or whatever it is, that we bring them forward and take them with us. And I think that's something that's in this play, you know, so beautifully. If you see, I don't want to give away the ending, but if you see the ending, you kind of understand that she sees the culture, she accepts it, and she's in it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important to value and tell and amplify our stories, because our stories are us, right? Our stories are who we are. And then the importance of them getting told and not forgotten is important. And I think that speaks to why we need art. We need art in our society, full stop, period. And we also need APIDA people making art. That's another full stop. So I'd like to talk about that for a second. This making this claim, we need to have APIDA folks make art. So what is it like being an APIDA professional in art? So Julia, I'm going to go to you. What's it like being an APIDA playwright?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's, I was telling Peter in a different conversation that I actually feel really lucky that I don't feel alone. I think there was a part, when I first started becoming a playwright, really just like 10 years ago, I was like, oh my God, I'm the only Japanese American playwright ever. I can't find Asian actors. I'm never gonna find anybody. Nobody's gonna do my plays. But that's just because of the tiny world that I was in at that time. And I just now I feel like there's so many, not enough, but there's so many more artists in the Asian diaspora, in theater and TV and film, in fiction writing and poetry, sort of all over the place. And so, yeah, I feel it's really lovely to feel like I'm part of a community, and also I was saying to Peter that it also takes a lot of pressure off of me to feel like I have to tell, our a very specific story to represent all of us. I have to do that. I have to represent everybody. And there's, I don't feel that pressure at all, because I know that I'm just one of many voices, and I have a certain experience. A different person has, a different person of a different background has a different experience. All of our different experiences are important to show. So that's really exciting to me.
I love that notion of we are moving away from a single story, right? We're moving away where it's like you have these, oh, look at that one Asian American story. We're moving away from that. And there are many Asian American stories coming out. And, I love the idea of being part of this network and this community, and that there are multiple, stories about, the Asian American perspective, which is huge. And so I love that we can now kind of be one of many, instead of just the one. So that's great. What about you, Professor Cirino? What's it like being an APIDA director?
Well, I was lucky enough that when I first moved here, I was approached by the Asian American Repertory Theater to kind of revive it, because it'd been dormant for about 7 years. And so it was really, really hard work, I have to be honest with you, because we would do all these amazing shows, and I'd say 70% of our audience was still not of the Asian community. And I felt, I was trying to find my identity within that culture, because coming from, because I have a mixed background as well. My dad was, his grandmother was Filipino, and then he was Italian on the other side, and my mom is Latinx, and so I had this kind of mix of people in me. And so when I was beginning to direct for them, I kept thinking there can't be one vision here, because there was no one Asian community we were dealing with. That's what people forget. People want to lop everybody together. So, if you're Filipino, oh, okay, you and the Chinese can kind of go in that corner. You and the Japanese can. And I'm like, that's so wrong, and it's so difficult. So we began slowly but surely to kind of look at it from a specific standpoint, that we would do a show within the Chinese community, then we would move to a Filipino show, then we would move to a Korean show, then we would move and bringing those playwrights in as much as we could. And it was really rough because finding actors, we had to almost train them. There were times we were casting 50% people that had done a little theater sometime, and 50% that were just walking on the street, and we said, you need to be in the play. And training them on the spot, because if not, then we wouldn't have been able to put these shows together. We did Joy Luck Club, and I would say that more than half of those people had never been on the stage in their entire lives. And so it was a difficult challenge, but it's gotten better. You know, we have been dormant for a while, but we're already talking next year. We're going to be doing a really massive piece called Romance in the Western Chamber, and it's a beautiful piece. It's taken from a Chinese folklore, and so it's growing. You know, now we have students that can sing and are in operas in LA and London, and so we can bring them back and put them in these shows. And it feels like it wouldn't be such a battle now. Like now we're able to move. Sorry, my dog.
That's okay.
So we're able to kind of more fluidly transition from one place to another into shows. So we feel really strongly like it's building, like we're building a community.
Sure, and that's not without advocacy, right? I mean, we've had to really kind of fight for our voice and our perspectives be seen and heard. And part of that is, we have, about at our peak, we had close to 320 people here today. And I want to urge you all to continue, to support APIDA art, right? So you need to go to plays, you need to go to movies, you need to support APIDA art so that we have it. And you also need to make it. So, to think about in our class, we had talked about, different definitions of success and being defined by society, defined by our parents, and defined by ourselves. And you need to, define success for yourself. And if that means making art, then make art. So, know that it is a viable field. And, I want to see APIDA folks making art. And if not making art, then participating in art, supporting it. So please do that. And that, again, is all advocacy. So I know that we're closing up, and one of the last things that I'd like to talk about is, Julia, so what prompted you to write this play, and how did you come up with the name Miku?
I started getting the idea for this play sort of soon after the 2016 election. I was thinking a lot about power and really how we teach children to aspire to power. And while that is a wonderful thing, especially for children who are in marginalized communities, there's power is extremely dangerous and can corrupt so easily and can hurt people so easily. And when we teach children to aspire to power, we don't teach them the dangers of it and the tricky parts of it. And I was just kind of like thinking about that kind of conundrum, and so sort of out of that musing came sort of this idea of like, okay, what if a young person says they want to aspire to the most power in the universe, which is like to be a god? Like, how do we handle that? What happens there? And so the play kind of actually started as kind of like a critique on power and an investigation of power. But as I was writing it, I kind of realized that a lot of aspirations from power come from feeling powerless. And one of the most powerless we often feel is during loss or grief. And so it kind of ended up becoming a play about more about actually grief and loss, in addition to also about sort of power. And the name Miku, I came up with, I wanted something that has sort of meaning. And so, in my head, the Japanese characters for Miku that could be read that could be used for Miku would mean beautiful sky. And also there's a virtual singer performer named Hatsune Miku, which is just like kind of like AI singer performer created, Vocaloid. Somebody put that in the comments, and which is exciting, but is, you know, it's sort of like it's the part of Japanese culture I don't like, which involves a lot of this like objectification of women, and so I kind of wanted to take that name and give it to a girl who has a lot of agency and is a human being.
Great. And then the last question, and I'm hoping Professor Cirino, if you can answer it in about 30 seconds or less. How did you bring Miku to San Diego State? What were you thinking?
Well, first of all, I have to say that it's Arts Alive. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
So yay, Arts Alive!
Yeah, Arts Alive. You know, and Elizabeth, they both worked tirelessly to be able to do it. I've been really lucky in with Arts Alive and other organizations to bring in playwrights, and I'd say that in the 18 years that I've done plays at State, I believe probably about 12 of those years we've actually been able to bring in the playwrights. Some were up the road, like when we've done other playwrights that are close by, you know, that was easy to bring them in, but we've tried to make that as part of the culture of what we do.
So not just the playwright, not just today, but I'm talking about Miku. What made you think about bringing Miku to campus?
Oh, the play itself. Oh my God, I fell in love with it. Like the moment you read that play, if you're not, I love, like you said, the grandma's great, but the Miku's lines to me reminded me of being a kid in my own head. Some of the things that she wanted and some of the things that I wasn't embarrassed to say out loud, like who didn't want to be a god? I wanted to be a god. And just really quick, a plug, the beautiful Marvel movie was made by the director of that big Marvel film is a San Diego alum from our undergraduate film department. So Destin Cretton, he's an amazing student. So
that's super. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. And I believe it is Arts Alive. They have a special treat to serve everybody. So don't go away yet. We've got another promo video coming up, but I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Smigel and Elizabeth. Take it away.
Sorry, let me make sure that I've got it optimized.
All right, thank you, everyone. Let's thank again Anne, Julia, Peter, and Virginia for such a stimulating session and all the beautiful comments in the chat. We all appreciate your engagement in the subject. We hope to do these sorts of events in person, to have these discussions in person so we can all see each other and share a space, because that's one of the beautiful, magical things about theater is having this enhanced, enriched space, thanks to all of us participating together. And it's such a strong reminder of why it's important that we are gathered together after this very surreal couple of years of being separated from each other. So it's nice to see everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again. As a reminder, performances of Miku and the Gods will be live streamed beginning this Friday, October 29th, and it will run through November 5th. And on opening night, Julia Izumi, who you just met this evening, will be joining the cast and crew in conversation with the audience. So if you'd like to meet her in person and speak with her or through Zoom, then go on opening night, this Friday. For tickets, please visit the website for the School of Theater, Television, and Film, and the link is posted in the chat box. And also a survey a link to a survey will be put in the chat as well. And we would be grateful for your response since it helps us to improve our programming. It will also be mailed to everyone who registered for the event. We also hope, of course, that you attend other events sponsored by One SDSU and Arts Alive SDSU, which you can learn about at one.sdsu.edu and artsalivesdsu.edu. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your week and enjoy the performance.